Wonderful. Welcome, friends. I'd like to introduce our special friend today, guest, Shiloh and Boss. And Shiloh and I, we've had many intersections through many amazing friends. And then the universe has circled us around together. And in our connection, I had a very extraordinary connection and feeling with you. I want to share with everyone that, the intention of these series has been how do we move forward? And I've been meeting and chatting with sages, people who hold great wisdom, warriors who hold great capacity to make things happen. And today I definitely want to share this beautiful divine being, Shiloh, with you today. So welcome, Shiloh. And we'll go into deeper realms of what you do and who you are. So let's introduce everyone. Would you be kind enough to share a little about who you are and what stirs you, what moves you in the world?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, Satyan, and a warm welcome and just an honorable salute to all the warrior sages out there, right? What a beautiful um, archetype, or a merger of archetypes to really orient around, especially in this time. And a little bit about me. I've dubbed myself an evolutionary strategist for the last 20 years of my career. I work on many systems and scales, currently in the field of organizational psychology, building high-performing cultures and teams in the world of business. I love supporting the development of conscious leaders and vision and values-based businesses that are here to make an impact, both on the people and partners that they work with, as well as their industry and the larger economy. It's a really fun place, a fun intersection to scale down into the individual world and individual lives of people, as well as scale up into the realms of brands and industry and larger systems. And so as an evolutionary strategist, that's the game I love to play. I love to support building systems and structures and strategy that help people and society evolve, ultimately towards a brighter, more conscious, empowered future, one that benefits all of life. And also, one that delivers kind of an ongoing pathways for choice, for agency. And all of that for me is really rooted in the patterns and principles of healthy living systems. So if we were to look at nature and what a thriving natural system would be based on, there's a lot of pattern language there, and a lot of abstract things to pay attention to, a lot of concrete things to pay attention to, and a lot of mystery to make way for. So it is both a science as well as an art, and one I love to devote myself to. And like I said, that moves through all sorts of scales. And currently it's in the world of business and leadership.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shiloh. So this is very interesting what you're sharing because it requires your awareness to be in multiple planes, multiple dimensions, feeling the micro, feeling our individual lives as people, individuals, families, little communities, all the way up to the macro and multiple dimension thinking and how this moves with that and this. And for many, many years, this has been a very male and masculine dominated realm. And much of the architectures that we have on this planet come out of that domination of the masculine energy. And then here you are, I meet you, and you're in that same dimension of organization and feeling, and you're this profoundly feminine, beautiful divine being. Can you share more about the arising of feminine wisdom as it relates to organizational psychology, evolution, strategies? Where does that fit in?
Yeah, I said that I just actually sent a really fun recent trend report to my team just yesterday. and said, more proof that this craft that I've been kind of stewarding so devotedly for the last 20 years is really gaining more and more awareness and more acceptability as the best practices in the field. And some of the drivers, right? So your question was kind of where and how is that what I'm getting? Where and how are we making way for more feminine intelligence in business and
Yes,
leadership? Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Let's talk about some of the drivers, right? So we've got internal drivers and external drivers. A big one, an internal one is I think the millennials actually have been a really big driver for this, as well as more women in the workplace as well. So therefore more of a need to be more inclusive, more accommodating. And that's great, right? So we've kind of designed kind of a culture to be that looks more towards things like work-life balance, things like collaboration, things like creativity. And that has naturally made room for things that are identified as more feminine principle. Decisions that actually get deliberated by many than just kind of cast down upon by one. Creative ideation that is empathy based, customer based, right? Relationship based. We see in sales a whole new kind of consulting like sales model. It's really in many ways, now I'll go into the external kind of drivers. Really, in many ways, that's just where the world is at. I think the world and the market in many ways is simply demanding that. And what's a big reason for that? Another big driver is that we're actually at this high level of complexity. I think perhaps many of the folks in the warrior stage community have heard about VUCA times, right? I think Jamie Wheel just did a really cool kind of podcast on it recently, but it's been a big piece of my leadership training when we're the markets and the industry. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous, right? And more of our, whether it's technology, it's been a huge driver, kind of always emerging. Every 2 years, we've got the planned obsolescence. The next thing is kind of happening. High levels of complexity, all sorts of, technology has been a massive driver. Globalization has been a massive driver. The internet has been a massive driver. Things don't take so long. So we've got just information and data kind of coming in from all directions. And then where we're standing today, right, which I think will be a fun thing to talk about because I've been having a lot of just really big ahas. Hopefully everyone is, harnessing the VUCA times, the volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous times that we're standing in as a pathway for awakening. But back to your question, all of these drivers, high level of complexity, is really, we actually need to utilize and grow different muscles than we used to have in kind of more traditional business that was more hierarchical, slower paced, bigger, larger bureaucratic systems, more mechanistic, reductionistic, extraction based. And these days, just how fast things are moving, how interconnected things are, how emergent and quick. Being in this age of synthesis, it requires more whole brain. It requires more well-roundedness of our human development. We need both well-honed intuition, well-honed emotional intelligence, as well as that kind of logic and, quick kind of thinking, as well as being able to take time and be with the process, actually think about the how are we doing things just as much as the what we are doing. think about the path, the means of getting there, just as much as the end that we have in mind, because of um, I think because of that high level of complexity, interconnectedness, and change that we're standing in. So if you really want to be kind of on the cutting edge and have business advantage, and by business advantage it also means keep your customers, have brand loyalty, attract and retain the best talent, these sorts of things. We actually have to build healthy environments where people can thrive, where they have agency, they can actualize and become, grow and evolve and become into kind of their own true kind of self, their true calling, their true north, and facilitate real value in the world, because there's just so many options. So lots of drivers, lots of variables. But I think those are big things that really drive for more of the feminine principles, of which I named kind of a lot of them that tend to get identified with more of the feminine piece. And I really, one of the books that I have, on my desk, one of its subtitles is actually the Synergizing Masculine and Feminine Intelligence for Business in the 21st Century. And some of your work, really involves a lot of tantric awareness, right? Tantric awareness in many ways is, how do we harness our creative energy and have a dance between the masculine and the feminine intelligence, so that there is enough spark, enough polarity, enough power, longevity, all of these, awakening, right? All of these things. This is really a mastery path. And for anyone who wants to, create a legacy, actualize their leadership vision, build an enterprise or a life that really makes an impact, I think a lot of those principles and practices are true across the board, cross contextual.
Yes. Beautiful. What you shared is totally what I'm experiencing and appreciating and realizing with the business leaders I'm working with. This recognition that the spectrum of intelligence is wider than perhaps possibly used, what we're identifying as masculine, and that this appreciation, honoring, allowing flowering of feminine wisdom, feminine intelligence, regardless if we're men or women or whatever type of identity we hold, it's within us all. And I truly feel that it is, if you will, the savior of our business. It's what will save business. It's what will save our planet. It's what's going to save humanity, because it's rooted in the principle of love. It's rooted in the value of connection. It's rooted in the value of seeing each other as humans, as one whole tribe to coexist with joy, with honor, with play, with all the beautiful expressions of combining our capacities together, rather than just following an order, direction, a hierarchical system. So this is where we're moving towards. And now with more momentum, I'm seeing it. And what can we do? So if there's those, what can we do who are leaders on this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
love it.
move that
This is
forward.
this is the juicy stuff. This is the juicy stuff. It's like I remember going to a really epic conference and it was called Leadership in a Self-Organizing World, right? And again, when we kind of get to this level of complexity, this level of fast technology, interconnectedness, all these kinds of things, we find that things are self-organizing, just like nature, right? What does leadership in a self-organizing world or a self-organizing system kind of look like? Well, I say kind of one of the biggest muscles that I love to cultivate with my leaders and my teams. Really, leadership happens on all levels and all sorts of departments and roles. You can lead your family, you can lead your own life, whatever it is. So it's very cross-contextual. But I think it really ultimately has a lot to do with two main things I want to point out. They connect. one of what you're saying is balancing or making way both for the masculine and the feminine intelligence, right? And I absolutely. And we see in the development of the mature development of leaders as we kind of mature as adults and in the leadership path, um, there's a stage, it's a critical stage that is about polarity management.
Mm.
And it's ultimately about, I say we have to cultivate a love affair, a romance with dynamic tension, the tension of opposites, form and freedom, love and power, fun and productivity, right? Like these kinds of things that a lot of times, especially in business and leadership and and complex systems, there are things that are inherently kind of, yeah, they contend with each other.
Yes.
It just goes with the territory, right?
Yes.
Sales and operations is a really great one. It's like, the salespeople all have to do a certain thing to make their jam work, right? And then there's the ops who need things to like do a certain jam to make their work, or the delivery, right? Very different worlds and flows, and they can kind of like be at each other. But they're actually, there's a polarity there that each one needs to be fully kind of in their essence, doing their thing, right?
Yes.
And they also need to be able to dance with each other, and they need to be able to kind of ride that polarity. And it's one of those things that actually, it's not about choosing one over the other. It's actually about managing the polarity ongoingly. And so we as leaders, and then, or we, if we want to actually create a thriving culture, there's actually something about it's a Buckminster Fuller term, right? Tensegrity. There's
Yes.
an integrity inside of the tension that we actually just have to cultivate, a little bit of fun and flair, cultivate a love affair with the dynamic tension. It's not going to go away. It comes with the territory. And so how do we play with it? How do we allow it? How do we know? And how do we track it? How do we manage it?
One of the things in our work with organizations, talking about these polarities as you shared about, right? Customer service versus raising of sales, as an example. Should we focus on this? Operations want their stuff laid out like this. Salespeople want to go out, make the sale, and throw the paperwork over here and make the next sale and go to the next person. And so, what seems to be antagonistic conflicts, oppositional energetics, one of the things that we work with, as you said, the tensegrity, the feeling, the joyful challenge between these two, the play. I like to look at all these seemingly opposites as a scale to
Mm-hmm.
play along. So
Yeah.
rather than seeing them as opposites, what if it's the whole piano keyboard? And that what seems to be oppositional is a play of notes. And that wisdom would have it that if we're in too stuck in one side, or we're too rigid, we're too identified with this is the way it needs to be. We need to be productive, and we need to focus on that. There's some people who have the predisposition, they're naturally producers. There's others who wants to keep it light. Let's have fun. Let's have joy. Let's make it more playful. And then they tend to be oppositional. Yet if we can sense they both hold wisdom, and rather than have it in either or, can we allow the spectrum of our humanity to flow between these? If I'm very playful, can I cultivate within myself from my fellow teammates, seeing the value of their capacity to follow through and to be very strong in that area? And and let me grow that within myself. And then let's grow that in our organization, vice versa. This is wisdom, the integration, the play of polarities, rather than keeping them or putting even more fire into the oppositional energetic.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
please,
And
if
it's,
you
well, as leaders, and just we what we get to do, what we're charged with, as leaders is paying attention to where our preferences are, right? And where our style is, and where we kind of naturally and inherently what we might empathize with or resonate with most easily. And I think ultimately, like you said, that spectrum, expanding our bandwidth, expanding our tolerance, expanding what we can animate, right? What we can make way for. You know, in the field of organizational psychology, I really talk about when with leaders, you know, kind of designing systems or cultures or, you know, organizational structures and flows and all that kind of stuff. It's really about creating the conditions that then all of these things can kind of thrive. Inside, as leaders, right, what am I doing to both strengthen and fortify myself? Both what conditions do I need to in order to kind of open that bandwidth in
Yes.
order to then be myself as a leader, create the conditions for kind of that spectrum to really come to life, you know, in the enterprise, if you will.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and so, and it kind of like a lot of what we're dealing with right now, right? You know, in this very, I really just the last couple of weeks, I don't know, I think maybe this, I might have mentioned this when you and I were connecting recently, that I really was just standing in the awareness that we are in the Black Swan event.
Yes.
And, you know, in Black Swan event is really when it's actually not one thing. It's not one thing caused by one thing. And we can't actually put our finger on the variable because we've reached a level of complexity, we've reached a level of interconnectedness, we've reached a level of like edge, like all the systems are sort of maxed. And so, you know, you move one little thing and it just is a cascade of dominoes. So there's so many kind of multivalent drivers, and then, you know, one thing kind of tips and the next thing is kind of, and I think that's really going to be, it is what we're standing in. I think it's going to be what we're going to continue to be standing in for this year, for the next few years. You know, and it's not, the Black Swan event is not a one thing that happens, but it's a phenomenon, it's a field, right, of multiplicities that are occurring. And how do we lead in that, right? And I think one thing for me to do, for us to do, is to really pay attention to, well, where are my preferences? Where are my biases? Where am I sort of hanging out in just what's familiar or most comfortable to me, where where the ego feels really shored up, like, oh, I really know this really well. This is my area of expertise. And I'm not saying, obviously, don't abandon that. You know, that's there for a reason. It's part of our strength space. And how can we actually be mindful of those areas to soften and widen and accompany more of the spectrum, if you will, like you were just talking about, Satya? And then what would it allow for us? Then what's possible?
Yes. Let's go way up high. I know you've been sharing with me that you've been looking at the organizational dynamics of this planet on many levels: political, environmental, socio-political, I mean, in every single way, technological. Give us a multi-mile high view of where are we on this planet right now? That's a big question. I mean, where are we on this planet right now? And feel free to draw in all your knowing here. And then secondly, where do you feel we're heading? And where would you feel we're heading? And you can call upon any realm that you're drawn into, okay?
Well, thanks. Thanks for the invitation. I just got a bunch of chills kind of shooting up my spine with that one.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I think we're heading towards the Great Singularity, and not exactly as Ray Kurzweil describes it, or many other folks. Um, and a great awakening, a massive kind of unveiling of sorts. And I think that like I was just mentioning about standing in the Black Swan event, where much of society has kind of been on cruise control and just sort of not really paying much attention to all of the drivers and variables that are underpinning things like why our economy is the way that it is, why our educational system is the way that it is, why our medical systems and standards and practices are the way that they are, why and how we take care of soil and agriculture. Again, all of these parts of these major systems, our beliefs, how do we actually govern? What are the fundamental principles of governance and our government and other governments, all of these kinds of things, right? Really paying attention to the bigger, more complex, things that are actually synthesizing right now. One of the great teachers that I've had the pleasure of working with and building an organization around was Richard Rudd of the Gene Keys. And I love the legend of the Gene Keys. I call it a legend. It's kind of a nice way to embrace the mythos of what we're standing in. And he says that we're in the age of synthesis, where very much where these dynamic tensions, these things that were once apparently opposite, like science and spirituality, if you want to kind of put it that way, east and west, masculine and feminine, are actually in a massive convergence.
Yes.
And in that convergence, in that synthesis, right, in the process of the synthesis is a flowering of a new level of consciousness. It's creating an entirely new baseline of awareness and of consciousness, right? I think the same thing is true when we find ourselves, all the things that were just the way that things are, it's just the way that it is, right? And then it kind of actually kind of goes right up to the line of absolutely not working, absolutely not serving the purpose that we thought it was. Well, it's not really educating us. It's not really, helping us with, our health, whatever it is that we want to kind of look at. And then we really begin to flower into a new baseline of awareness. And so we're in the midst of that massive flowering. For some people, it's going to be like ecstatically, like radically, like super fun and really awakening. And for other people, it's going to be absolutely infuriating, totally confronting, super maddening. And for any one of us, it could be all of those things depending on the day. Yeah. And depending on the circumstances that are touching us in the moment. And I think the singularity, I really feel and believe that we are in prophetic moments, all across the board, whether it's the multiplicity of indigenous lineages and teachings, the biblical times that we're in. We're in a turning of an epoch. We're in the turning of a time. We kind of many of the calendars, right? Like literally like reset, like we're at the end of time and a new time is beginning. And for me, this is exactly why I feel like I'm born on the planet. And I'd be so bold to say that I'm not the only one who feels literally here for that, here for that great awakening, here for that kind of portal, that passage, and a bridge building, something that kind of ushers us out of the old and into the new. And those way showers, or those transformers, literally within our own beings, within our lifetime, choose to be a bridge and literally go through a transmutation, a full changing of form, to usher in kind of this new era. And it's like through a singularity, meaning, a 0 point field where, like, it's just the mystery. And well, what's that about? Well, I think it's about, one of the universal laws of free will. To whatever extent that we really have it, the truth is that it's like, it's our kind of divine inheritance to claim that, and to know ourselves as creators, and to kind of, face the unveiling, face the confrontational space, and go through whatever kind of realization we need to have in that, and then move through that. It's a portal there, and it requires, just with one of my mentors today, and we were just talking about how much it is very much like a threading the needle, the eye of the needle. And there's a sort of taking of vastness and bringing it through. And in that vastness, to kind of hone in and thread the needle, go through the singularity, like, there's a lot of stuff that is not going to get through the eye of the needle. And we ourselves get to hone and kind of get, release what's not serving, kind of unveil, where the illusions are, and then refine, and choose, what is the most essential thing that we would really, really want to take through on the other side. I think it's totally up to us. This is a choose your own adventure kind of dimension. I do think that there's a lot of energies that are contending for, sort of jockeying for position to kind of forecast or imprint, onto that kind of passageway of what things are going to look like. Are we headed towards like a 5G reality or a 5D reality? It's kind of one little, tension, but those are just metaphors really for these hallmarks. But I do think, some planet, I think many planets have probably gone through singularities, at different times. Maybe some of us old souls have done it ourselves. And so we kind of have a sense of what one trajectory might look like and what another could look like. And then it's really, again, how are we choosing? How are we leading? How are we creating as we move through this portal?
I wonder how many of us Warrior Sage family are shaking or moving, because my hair is standing up right now. And when you
I was
shake
just thinking about the warrior sages, right? I
that,
mean, isn't this exactly part of what you're doing, right?
this is
It's
what we're
like,
here for.
that's the call. That's the summon.
There's so many of us here. I know when we're listening to this are feeling, I am that one. I am also part of this way shower. I'm also part of this transition team. Put your name in the chat box if you feel you are, and perhaps what's coming through right now regarding how are you. You might not even know. You just might know that you are. And so
Mhm.
I'm feeling this. I certainly know that I'm part of that team like
Mhm.
you are, Shiloh. And I know there's many of us who are feeling that. For those of us who are in that, and you talked about going through the eye of the needle to usher in this new reality, what's the best steps that you're feeling, or what's in your heart to share for us who are the transition makers?
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, a couple things come through. Thanks, Satyan. And staying awake, and staying awake with each other, because there's a lot of times then in the transition, in this, these kind of volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous times, right, that we're in, there's going to be a slew of breakdowns and breakthroughs. It's kind of just, it's an inherent part of transformation. It's an inherent part of awakening. It's an inherent part of our mastery. It's an inherent part of our healing, um, and maturation too, right? And so staying awake to kind of as much of the witness capacity that we can have, but also as much truth telling that we can have, in what's really happening, even though we know it might just be a story that we're needing to say, and that's, but again, what's really happening, and that sense of, and then doing that together. I think there's a huge part of having a sangha, having a community, because there's a lot of times where I am just a mess and I need someone to hold a field that is the transcendent space, that is the awakened kind of witness, the sage space, right? The warrior space. As I kind of shed, as I kind of unravel, as I kind of strip down, whatever needs to be shaken loose, whatever needs to be confronted, whatever needs to be undone, to then kind of go, got it, and my most essential nature, my most resource kind of, through line, that thing that is the greater purpose. So I think that's a really huge one. Stay awake, stay tracking, stay with each other, hold space for each other, ride the waves of the breakdowns and the breakthroughs, and make way for things, make way for the mystery. Make way for the mystery. I have a visceral sense, and have for years, that there are like literally a substance of grace, like a nebula, like an actual nebula that is grace, an actual substance that has been hurling through the galaxies, making her way to us. And that is an actual, like a substance. And the more that we make room and host the unknown, like literally just go to the edge of your knowing and your not knowing, and stay awake and notice and pay attention what's right there, and just make way for kind of what emerges. There's a lot to be said for hosting emergence, and it does require a lot of muscles that are rare. Not a lot of us really have them, and I think we have to cultivate them in these, cultivate those muscles, and that kind of field holding, that presence holding within ourselves and with each other and kind of the greater collective. And in that space, all of those characteristics, those virtues, those capacities, that are inherent and encoded, made for these moments, the real wisdom, like that is the sword, it will arrive as it's required. And it's kind of like an electromagnetic kind of thing or something.
That's the trust and the trust and the faith component of all of this. In some warrior traditions, we talk about there's the known, there's the unknown, that we're always aiming to try to know a little bit more through expanding our consciousness, science, investigation, experimentation, facing reality. And yet there's also the unknowable, the known, the unknown, and the unknowable. And part of our warriors' practice is to find certainty in our eternity, in this presencing in the midst of the unknowable and the unknown, and to start getting even more and more comfortable that as we grow as spiritual beings, as we grow as empowered, conscious, awake beings, that the lantern of light is actually less. We don't see actually further out as we become more awake, because we become the lantern itself. And so we see perhaps only a foot. We walk that foot, we see the next foot. but to get comfortable and easeful and relaxed, and in fact, even faithfully enjoy that you don't know the unknowable, that the richness of this moment is already being infused with awareness. As you said, the encoded awareness within us of what to do, like birds know how to make nests. It's encoded. There's no instructional manual. There's no step by step A to B. There's no IKEA instructions that birds get. But we have that, and we are about to fly, and we're encoded with the totality of wisdom and know-how already within our cellular body, within our divine essence, within our co-relationship. So for me, this power that you share about being the presence for others as we're unwinding, galvanizing, strengthening, and also allowing ourselves to fall apart, to be received, to be held, is just as powerful by those who are taking the mantle of being in the strength, certainty position. And to be able to flow in all of it is really what's being called upon. The vulnerability and the invincibility simultaneously.
Mhm. Yeah. I think the more that we can host the spectrum
Yes.
of who we are, of what's possible, of what's really going on in the world, right? The known, the unknown, and the unknowable. The more that we can have a quality of character that makes room for that kind of presence and that sort of vividness in all of that trifecta, and allows for that to be, we have more agency and choice, you know, to just kind of be not only be kind of smooth and clear and, you know, with it, but actually perhaps have, you know, the wildest ride ever, you know, the most fun, the most marvelous, the most ecstatic. um Again, back to the romance,
Yes.
right? Back to this kind of just this awe, which in many ways, I think a lot of us had when we were children, perhaps, or, you know, in those, just in some of the most sweet, you know, innocent, you know, marveling moments. You know, we all have them, you know, wherever they've come from for us. But there's something that can be cultivated, like that kind of awe, that kind of marvel, that it's almost a slightly different octave,
Yes.
but it's available. That kind of, you know, sort of vividness can be available when we're hosting the spectrum in that way. And yeah, and to not forget, you know, to not forget um, the body, to not forget the nature, to not forget the things that we love and the things that we need. Um, I think there's a reaffirming of some of the most fundamentals, right? And any warrior sage, you know, that's in the wisdom path or the mastery path, knows that over and over again, we're always kind of returning to the fundamentals. And we cultivate a love affair with the fundamentals. And I think that's a real piece to it as well, piece to the journey.
Shiloh, I really appreciate the years of cultivation that just flows so seamlessly and beautifully and gracefully through you. I'd love you to share, it's a final for today, whatever's in your heart, whatever's in your soul to share for our Warrior Sage brothers and sisters here.
Mm. Ah, Sachin, it's been so wonderful to be in this conversation with you. So thank you for the invitation. And hmm, yeah, to the Warrior Sage community, the mastery path, the wisdom way, right? The way, the warrior that chooses to kind of cultivate their self, the fierce courage, the kind of bravery to face the shadow, to peel through all of these things, and then the sage to be able to sit still within the storm and to kind of find a middle path, to host the full spectrum. All of these characteristics, I think truly they are the most needed thing in these times. This kind of way of being that is cultivated, this kind of leadership that makes room for the spectrums, that knows how to, manage and allow for the polarities, for the emergence and the wisdom to unfold through the middle way, and who we have to be, is really, really needed. And for us leaders, that are on that commitment path to developing ourselves as leaders, it's a lifelong journey. It doesn't stop. We've never arrived, and so again, kind of cultivating that endurance, that devotion, yet also that allowance that just kind of allows us to keep going, to keep coming fresh to the experience, to not give up, to not be, hardened, to go ahead and fall apart and get vulnerable with your allies, so that you can kind of be reborn in the face of it, is a really huge piece. And in that, find a narrative. Let's create a narrative
Yes.
that holds what we are going through and helps us find a way through. That is, so important. So many of us leaders, we know that if we're not able to kind of create an empowering story that frames us, that kind of entices us to move through what we're going through, then it's very hard to summon the fuel to do so. We are the meaning makers. We are kind of self-authoring this, and we are the co-creators that will create, the now and the future, the next now. And so, in your own way of being, but also together, form a narrative and form a way of being that, helps us find a way through. I think that's, and that is what we're here for. That's
Beautiful.
what comes up for me. Big, huge bow to the warrior sage, and that path, that mastery path. I stand in solidarity in that spirit, and great honor and reverence to all the work that's going on in this journey.
Shiloh, thank you so much for your depth of beauty,
Mm.
grace, and radiance and wisdom. Thank you, friends and family, for being here today. There's so much richness in here, more than just the mind. There's something that's been touched, I'm sure. Please allow what's been touched to continue to flower and honor and nurture that, and watch our spirits rise and arise together. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you.
Much love. Thank you.